Congressman Darrell Issa, representative for California's 50th Congressional District. Member of the House Judiciary Committee. Member of the House Foreign Affairs Committee. Former Chairman, House Oversight and Government Reform Committee. Author of the book, Watchdog: The Real Stories Behind the Headlines from the Congressman Who Exposed Washington's Biggest Scandals. With nearly 20 years in the House of Representatives, Congressman Issa is recognized as a tough investigator and, as is the title of his book, a watchdog, especially on matters of waste, fraud, and abuse. Congressman Issa is the principal author of the bipartisan Digital Accountability and Transparency Act. This law institutes government-wide standards for spending data, given the public unprecedented access to federal spending information. Be it management of technology in government or national technology policy affecting privacy, intellectual property, or social media, Congressman Issa has few peers. He is the co-author with Congressman Gerry Connolly of the landmark Federal Information Technology Acquisition Reform Act, which increases both the authority and accountability of federal chief information officers. Congressman Issa is the 2019 recipient of the CES Government Technology Leadership Award. EDGE 2021 is pleased to welcome to the stage Congressman Darrell Issa.
Well, that was polite, but last night it was a larger crowd. You were more excited. Is it to the lack of alcohol? Don, can we get something to spruce up this crowd? They've given me 20 minutes, which is either 19 minutes too long for a congressman, 19 and a half minutes too long, or way too short to talk about the challenges that all of you are going to face in the immediate years to come. So I'm going to choose to take all those challenges and boil them down to now 19 minutes, rather than that introduction which implies that Congress has all that much of a role in this. When Gerry Connolly and I worked on FITARA and also on the Data Act with Senator Warner and others, what we were really trying to do was simply to unleash the capability of the men and women in the government to, in fact, modernize the government. That job is always going to be a work in progress, but unfortunately, some of our competitors, and for a moment I'll just use China as an example, they are so far ahead of us in the focus on unleashing that in fact Congress has to help the federal workforce and our private sector partners catch up, because that's where we are. We are no longer, this is like when Sputnik went up. Oddly enough, you know, the Russians called their vaccine Sputnik, which I thought was interesting because they were not first with the vaccine and it doesn't work as well. But for Russia, Sputnik is still their pride. But like Sputnik, we are behind our competition. We're behind them in cybersecurity, at least offensively. We're certainly behind them in the ability to knock your own satellite out of space. And when we think about everything that we live by kinetically, we have challenges, and those are not the subject of today. How we work with a Navy now, the Chinese Navy is larger than the US Navy, that's for another day and another committee. But when we look at the data that is being produced in the private sector and the massive amount of data that's being produced at the government behest, either directly or indirectly, there is today no central ability of our government to say, what is our data plan? Nearly 10 years ago, the then Republican leader, Eric Cantor, and I were in a meeting, and he asked me to be there because he said, you're kind of a techie guy and you know about this big data thing. And I thought it was interesting that he knew enough to know that he knew this was important, but he wasn't sure what it was going to be. Now, he now works in New York. He's up in the Wall Street area. They get it on what their big data is about. But let's just go through a simple reality. And I know there are people here who are doing biometric research, artificial intelligence for recognizing faces in a crowd quickly, all kinds of interesting technology. But let's just go through a simple one that I think is important. When Tiger Woods had his accident, a few days after his accident, they got a warrant and they took the computer out of that car so they knew what the G-forces were, the speed, and all the other characteristics immediately before his accident. As many of you know, with 5G, that data will be, in all likelihood, being transmitted in real time. What are we going to do with it, and how are we going to do it? So I've rambled through a few areas of data, but I want to propose something for all of you to consider. And I told Beth I was going to point her out, but I can't see in the crowd. There we are. Oh, you're in the back row. Okay. In your role at the Department of Homeland Security, this may be more significant to you than anything else. In 1 year, America decided that it was going to go from discovering a new disease to having a vaccine and effectively the cure for the COVID-19. We called it a Manhattan Project. Great. Manhattan Project was great in World War II. It really had a lot to do with ending the war. Certainly it ended the war with Japan. So where is the similarity in data with COVID-19 and with the Manhattan Project? Well, let me explain for a moment something that's going on in government that I'm concerned about. We have the private sector working in partnership with the federal government, and we have now more or less 9 different vaccines and the intellectual property that went with all of it. And at the highest level of government, there is now a call to invalidate all the patents, all the protective intellectual property that was developed at the cost of billions of dollars over that period of time, based on the assumption that then we would give this technology to everyone in the world and it would drive down the price. As though patents are the only reason that it costs $1 to $3 to make a vaccine per dose. Now, I'm going to relate that to the Manhattan Project for a moment, and I'll bring this all back together before my 20 minutes is up. What we're suggesting is the equivalent of, at the moment that we finish the Manhattan Project, we should have, in fact, given the entire world the secrets to how to build a nuclear weapon based on the assumption that they would build a better, faster, cheaper, and safer nuclear weapon. Now, although the Rosenbergs did get that information, the reality is we continue to hold that information close because we believe we're the best stewards of it. And yet we're looking at the idea that you could give this to others and somehow they would make an effective vaccine when in fact it's even difficult for many of our companies to reliably make them. I say all of that because now let's talk about the Manhattan Project of data. The Manhattan Project of data is clearly going to be all the data with all the sensitivity of everything in our lives, because it's all going to be collected. Where you are, what you're doing, the car you're in, the speed, the trajectory, whether you hit the turn signal, whether your eyes were looking at the dash. This is only the tip of the iceberg of what can be and inevitably will be collected. In London, where cameras will decide whether to send you a ticket because you drove into the city but didn't have parking rights, that's been going for years and it's very effective. Clearly, cameras are going to be a part of it. All of that data, rights, responsibility, who's going to be in charge? So looking at the concept of you've got a public-private partnership, you've got the government involved, there are 2 things that we have to figure out, and Congress has a role in this. Will we absolutely protect the private sector's investment and their intellectual property so they get a predictable contractual return on what they put into the partnership? Then the flip side of it, will the United States government maximize the benefit and the reusability of that data while protecting the privacy of the American people, while protecting the constitutional rights, not just of the American people, but candidly, the people of the world. Because as we lead, we are likely to lead for most of the world. Today, there's no central decision on that. So for many people deep in the bureaucracy, and Beth, this is one of the reasons that I enjoyed our conversation and really saw it as a nexus. Agencies like Homeland Security and the FBI want and need certain data. They also are going to be the protectorates of that data not being misused or abused or even shared back with partners in an inappropriate manner. And yet, this conference, which brings together people beyond just buyer, seller, but in fact, people thinking about the future of our partnership, of our $92 billion plus of IT that the federal government spends every year. This has got to be one of the subjects that for the rest of this conference, the next conference later in the year, and throughout, we've got to start asking, when are we going to have a central, and I hate the term czar, but a central planner where we bring together and we figure out why is it the federal government buys the same data multiple times? Why is it we give away data only to buy it back after it's been massaged? Why is it the American people sometimes pay for data that they've already paid to be produced? And most importantly, how are we going to bring together an infinite amount of capability in a way that gives us all the benefits, sort of the best of Google without the ads popping up? That's a question that I'm hoping you're all going to resolve between all of you, because Congress can only legislate an idea that is matured. We cannot legislate the basic idea of go out there and do this, because if we do, we're still going to have to come back and say, now how do we implement it? And a decade after FITARA and the Data Act, we're still implementing them, so I'm acutely aware of that. Lastly, and I didn't get my 5-minute warning, so I'm probably doing okay. I'm going to touch on the rail, the biggest rail that I think is not being touched on regularly. I mentioned the $92 or so billion of IT spending. Food for thought. In the first 50 to 100 years of our nation, the largest source of funding for the federal government was basically customs, alcohol, tobacco, and other goods. That was how we funded almost everything we did. When throughout that entire period, the second source was federal land sales and federal land leases. Then the IRS came around with the income tax, and it became our largest source of revenue. And oddly enough, land leases and land sales continue to be the second largest. And today, as far as I know, it is still the second largest source of funding of the federal government is the wealth of our nation's natural resources, oil, natural gas, grazing rights, and so on. I'm going to put a question out to you that I don't have an answer to, but I believe the answer should be evident to all of us if we look out 50 years. Why wouldn't the greatest value, a value that is created not just billionaires, but multi-trillion-dollar companies? We're now, I think we have $3 trillion companies and more coming. If we can have trillion-dollar companies that are based on technology, but more importantly, based on harvesting data, because let's face it, Google has nothing but the value of its intellectual property. I know all of you have those little speakers that talk back to you, but trust me, that's not where the real money's being made. So now I'm going to propose that the greatest buyer of data is the federal government. The greatest accumulator of data, including the census and others of the federal government, is the federal government. So now the question is, why is it today, and if not today, in 50 years, why wouldn't data be the second, or even, I doubt the first, but why wouldn't it eclipse land use and rental and oil rights? If we know that the accumulation of the kind of data I talked about briefly, if we know that that data is worth trillions of dollars in the free market, why is it represents no revenue to the federal government? And why is it that the federal government today isn't working in partnership with the many companies who can help it produce, harvest, and then in fact take to market that data in a format that doesn't just enhance our lives, but enhances our lives and reduces the burden of other taxes on running the federal government? So I'm not an appropriator, I'm not on Ways and Means, but I see a future where the federal government is organized to look at data holistically, to look at the benefit and the protection holistically, where key members of the president's government are concerned about your constitutional rights, your privacy rights, and in fact, getting a return on data which is being gathered to where you get the benefit in two ways. You get the benefit, obviously, of a more intelligent city, one in which that automobile racing too fast down a road that has seen thousands of cars go down it and knows that you cannot make that turn at that speed in that vehicle, and alerts the driver and even potentially slows the driver down, saving a terrible rollover. That technology is right here. It's today. It's not even tomorrow. It's available, and it's coming in a matter of maybe hundreds of weeks, but not thousands of weeks. That is coming, but are we in fact looking at it holistically? So when Don asked me to come here and speak, I thought about, well, what do I talk about? And I was obviously furious about the invalidating of patents, the whole idea we do that. I'm furious about breaking up companies simply because they're very large or because they don't like my politics. I'm furious about a lot of things. But having taken 2 years off from Congress and now returning, I'm also optimistic that in fact, we are right on the edge of realizing three important things. There's always three things, as you know, when a speaker gets up here, because if you use more than that, you're going to miss more than one, as a certain Texas governor discovered. One, we are in a race against competitors that we now can feel their breath right at our neck. And whether it's China or other countries, we know that in fact we no longer have the huge lead, so we know we have to do better. Two, we got a wake-up call with the pandemic that life is both precious and fragile, and that in fact we must be better at everything we do, including tracking diseases around the world. When I talk about the importance of data, the WHO clearly doesn't have a great system for tracking diseases and disease occurrences around the world, and if they don't, then we don't have an early warning. So we learned that. But lastly, we also learned something. We learned that our economy could shut down, that old expression of $1 billion here, $1 billion there, pretty soon it's real money, could be made into $1 trillion here, $1 trillion there, and that our economy could collapse. And it only came back when we found solutions to the problem. So I'm going to propose that in fact, the secret to our world being at peace, the secret to Americans feeling safe in their homes, and the secret, quite frankly, to us leading for the next 100 years and beyond is going to be that we look at these partnerships, the partnerships that we form right here between private sector, ingenious companies, and the government, and we say, you know what, we need more than a win-win of a good value for a good service. We need to link those services. We need to roll those up in those conferences that occur with the IT professionals in government. We need to roll those up into a comprehensive plan, one that looks at cross-pollinating all these programs, one that looks to not just the success of sites not crashing and servers not being still using DEC technology from the 80s, but that next generation of data that does more than Google, more than any of our other tech companies we're so proud of, and it actually brings together value for the American people, and I'm going to propose here value that can be monetized for both our partners and for the federal government. Because in the future, it is likely that our oil and gas reserves will still have some value. But the idea that today we pay net to acquire and compile data with no return on investment when that data can be and should be made available to the rest of our country and the rest of our world, and it's valuable enough to create trillion-dollar enterprises. So with that, I want to thank you all for inviting an old guy, a former technologist turned politician back, and I look forward to being here, hopefully once again, if I finish exactly when that 1 goes to 0. So thank you.
Thank you, Congressman. Before you leave, I just have to say I had 3 people come up to me and say, that is amazing. 2 people want to have dinner with you. And so I know his schedule at Congress.
We can do that in Washington.
I know his Congress is, the schedule depends on it, but this is your official invitation to continue this, and we will give you as much time as you want in January.
20 minutes is enough to provoke thought. Thank you, Don.
It was very good. Thank you very much.